I am Captain Spawn, and this is day 337 of Spawn Year. When I think of other 12-issue comic book stories, Watchmen, Batman, The Long Halloween, it's hard not to think a writer would have to intentionally work at getting as little accomplished in that many issues as McFarlane gets done with Endgame, especially with as many words as he uses. An entire year's worth of issues, 264 pages, and this is all we get? There's certainly something to be said for taking your time with a narrative, getting to know characters so they come alive, exploring fascinating inherent ideas inside your concept and plotting, but McFarlane's storytelling MO really hasn't changed since those early issues. He writes long, boring scenes where characters sit around giving long-winded exposition, and when people crack a joke, yell obscenities, or complain, that's supposed to be character stuff. All these people so far are generic and wooden. Mark had potential, but he's mostly been a vehicle for exposition like everybody else. This issue finally gets somewhere by the end, but only because we've been stalling out until we hit a nice round number, as usual. I think I'm being forced to repeat myself as much as McFarlane is. I didn't need to see Jim's long, dull path from thug to thug until he finally got to Nortego. None of that told me anything about who our protagonist is. It was all an excuse for violence and really big, silly word balloons. And again, I like McFarlane's art, though this time Rob Liefeld got a credit too. Noodle that one. I don't really see it. So it all looks dynamic and thrilling, but I've been reading this stuff for 11 months, and I am so bored with all the same plain Jane situations. Maybe if I got Spawn Can and Amnesia again, I'd like all this more. So Jim interrogates a doctor who worked for a spooky experimentation hospital and learns that he designated Patient 47 was the last person experimented on there, and that they were practicing Holocaust-level inhumane methods. And this doctor is the one who leads Jim to Nortego. The scene includes the goofiest intimidation line in an enormous overkill thought balloon I've seen in a while. Jim tells the doctor if he so much as stutters, he'll rip his head off. So the man naturally trips over his words and Jim yells, "You just stuttered!" If there was any panel I could take out of context without any other balloon except that one and make a meme out of, it'd be this panel. Spawn is a public speaking teacher. You better enunciate, keep those ums in check, and be really, really persuasive. Then we learn from Mark, who has an epiphany because his insidious cough is gone, that Jim's presence cures people of any illness. Well, that's convenient. The one guy investigating those miracle cures is the only character in the book who's remotely ill. Sure, that is a plausible coincidence, but pretty obviously planted right in the middle of the arc when McFarlane suddenly realized he didn't have a plan for how Mark would figure that out. I'm also not sure I buy how completely positive Mark is that that's what's going on, just because he doesn't have a cough anymore and he was in a room with Jim for a couple of minutes. But it is an intriguing revelation. Then Jim goes to Nortego, turns all his goons into the "I'm glad you're dead" guy from Tim Burton's Batman, and manhandles him until he finally spills that Jim Downing was actually in charge of the horrible experiments in that hospital and got desperate when he didn't get whatever results he wanted, so he experimented on himself. Wow, that is really an unexpected and fascinating twist. I just wish we'd gotten it 6 or 8 issues ago. Really, you could just start right here and you wouldn't need any of the rest of it. And that tells us that if it's true, Jim was an Al Simmons level creep in life and just the sort of person Bulgy might have made into a Spawn were he still alive. I wonder if hell somehow gave him the symbiote on purpose. It means he had little regard, likely, for human life, just as he's demonstrated as Spawn. Which means some of that might have been his personality after all, was willing to do anything to anyone to get what he wanted, and interestingly, what he wants both then and now is information. I wonder if that motivation will be further parallel between past and present when we finally discover what the experiments were all about, if perhaps he was somehow trying to find himself back then as he is now. I'm really interested in how he was so desperate he experimented on himself, a la the Lizard in Spider-Man. Jim thinks, as does Ortega, that the Spawn symbiote is the result of those experiments, and I'm quite curious to see how McFarlane explains how that happened through surgery, especially since Clown all but confirms it is indeed Al's suit in his half-truth training rhetoric. At the end, Clown has Jim ready to become a general in his army to go up against Heaven and Hell, who Clown says are both equally detestable and care nothing for people except his pawns, after showing him Al's remains and giving him the shoulder skulls as his general insignia, which I guess are the only accessories that aren't actually part of the costume. Clown's lies are believable enough, and I somewhat buy Jim going along with it, partly because Clown is someone who seems to have answers and he's desperate. I hope he's cautious enough not to take everything Clown says at face value and maybe pretends to go along just to learn what he can, and is maybe a little smarter than Al, who never listened to anything Cagliostro said until the book needed Cog to deceive him. I'm still having a hard time getting past the severe retconning and keeping in mind that we're back in a world that doesn't know it ended and in which most people don't believe in anything supernatural anymore. It's too bad we didn't get to explore what society was like in a world where everyone knew for sure that cosmic forces exist. Now there's all this talk from Clown about heaven and hell at war, and I just don't care because I saw the end of that already. This is all good starting place stuff, but since I knew nothing about who this guy was before now, it just shouldn't have taken this long. And still, I don't have much of a reason to care what happens to him yet. As far as I know, he's just a scary, horrible human being like Al was. Signed, Captain Spawn.